Hey guys, in today's video I bring you an impressive and transformative story that will challenge everything you thought about faith and religiosity. Let's meet Draven Blackwood, a man who was faithful to rituals and tithing, but who only discovered the truth when he died and had a direct encounter with Jesus. On the other side, he was confronted with the shocking revelation that his faith was empty and that heaven cannot be bought with obligations. What Jesus showed him will move you deeply. So, before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications, and comment below which city you are watching this video from. Now prepare yourself for a spiritual journey that will impact you from start to finish. I'm Draven Blackwood, and from a young age I've lived between the concrete of Chicago's streets and the polished pews of church. My life has always followed an exact rhythm, marked by Sunday services and a routine of obligations that, over the years, turned into a list of spiritual tasks. I clearly remember the deep sound of the church bell every morning, summoning us to a ritual that, for many, was pure devotion, but for me, had become an almost mechanical formality. I paid my tithe religiously, even when financial constraints threatened to undermine the stability of my daily life. On those long afternoons of waiting as I headed home, my thoughts oscillated between the feeling of security provided by the community and the emptiness that left me with the feeling that something essential was missing. Once, during a service, an old friend whispered, "Draven, have you ever stopped to think if behind so much ritual, real feeling isn't missing?" These words disturbed me, but I always pushed them to the back of my mind, justifying that faith was a matter of discipline. However, the city of Chicago, with its mix of modernity and tradition, seemed to mock my complacency. The skyscrapers and the incessant movement of the streets contrasted with the devotion-filled environment that I attended religiously. This duality always worried me, but I clung to routine as if it were the only anchor in the midst of existential turmoil. Despite all the rigor with which I maintained my spiritual commitments, a feeling of incompleteness always haunted me. I believed that by following each step imposed by tradition, I had secured a sure path to salvation, but something inside me cried out for a deeper, more living truth. This silent restlessness, almost imperceptible to the eyes of those around me, was the harbinger of an awakening that would come unexpectedly. During those days, my religious routine was an exact sequence of commitments and rituals that marked each moment of the week. I would get up early before the sun even rose to prepare for Sunday worship. I walked through the icy streets of Chicago, with my thoughts focused on the certainty that with every penny of my tithe, I was investing in my redemption. I remember one morning, as I walked to church, hearing the unmistakable sound of the bell, which seemed to call me to a predetermined destination. Once there, the atmosphere was a whirlwind of familiar faces and rehearsed voices who, like me, sought refuge from reality and faith. Inside the church, the wooden pews creaked under the weight of a devotion that I considered almost sacred, but which gradually revealed itself to be too mechanical for my restless soul. During the service, prayers were recited in unison, a liturgy that was repeated in a ritualistic way, with no room for spontaneity or the human warmth that I secretly wanted to feel. In one of the quiet moments, I heard the whisper of an old friend, Jonathan, who leaned over to me and commented in an almost conspiratorial tone, "Draven, do you ever feel like something is missing? That this practice, although noble, has become a mere obligation?" His words, spoken in a whisper, echoed inside me, awakening a doubt that I tried, unsuccessfully, to stifle. As the service progressed, each gesture, each movement, seemed like a perfectly tuned gear but devoid of feeling. Tithing, that act that I carried out with such rigor, was no longer just a financial contribution. It had become a burden that weighed on me, an obligation that drained part of my essence. On the way home, as the city lights began to shine, I wondered if the money I handed over could actually buy inner peace. It was as if each coin had a price, and I, without realizing it, was paying with my own authenticity. This silent clash between ritual and the search for greater meaning meant that each day became an internal battlefield, where faith was transformed into a simple mechanism distorted and empty, that yearned for a renewal that was yet to come. That afternoon began like any other, but ended in an instant that defied the understanding of time. I was driving through the busy streets of Chicago, my mind occupied with the thoughts that circulated silently about the routine of the service and the questions that Jonathan's murmur had awakened. Suddenly, a booming sound cut through the constant hum of traffic. A truck, appearing unexpectedly and, without obeying the signal, advanced with uncontrollable fury. In an instant, everything turned into chaos. I felt the violent impact, the metallic sound, and the screams that echoed around me. "My God, what is happening?" I screamed as the world seemed to spin in slow motion, the sound of glass breaking mixed with the roar of the engine, while the force of the collision threw me against the steering wheel. In the midst of the chaos, I heard a frightened neighbor say, "Hold on tight, Draven." But my shaking hands could no longer control the car. The impact was overwhelming, and for a brief moment reality dissipated into a haze of pain and disbelief. I remember seeing flashing lights, the faces contorted with panic all around, and most of all the overwhelming feeling that time had stopped. Amid this cacophony, an inner voice whispered unanswered questions, while the sound of skidding tires and approaching sirens provided a soundtrack of despair. Every detail of that second was engraved in my memory. The smell of burning oil, the sharp pain that seemed to invade every fiber of my being, and the distant sound of voices trying to coordinate the confusion. From that moment on, my reality fragmented, opening the way to a new chapter that I still couldn't completely understand. That instant after impact was like diving into an endless abyss. For a brief space of time, the known world dissolved into a whirlwind of darkness. I felt my body float, devoid of the gravity that had always anchored me to the earth. It was as if, when I closed my eyes, I had entered a portal to another dimension. The feeling of detachment was terrifying and at the same time liberating, as if I were being invited to leave the prison of a life ruled by mechanical obligations. In this limbo, the darkness gradually gave way to a blinding, comforting light that seemed to encompass my entire existence. I found myself in a space where time and space were blurred. It was an environment of serenity, where each ray of light carried a pulsating energy of life. Amid this sea of clarity, there were no shadows, just a palpable sense of peace, and at the same time an intensity that defied all my perceptions. As I floated in that vast luminous ocean, a soft yet deep voice began to resonate around me. "Draven," said the voice, full of a tone that mixed tenderness and authority, "why did you stick to rituals that do not feed the true essence of your being?" The voice seemed to come from all sides, and simultaneously, from inside me. In a mix of amazement and fascination, I tried to understand the message, but the words floated, almost intangible, in the ethereal air. I felt each word sink in deeply, awakening memories and emotions that I had held so tightly. It was as if the veil that covered my soul had been torn, allowing me to glimpse reality beyond the conventions I had always known. There, in that space between life and death, every beat of my heart seemed to synchronize with the silent melody of that transcendental encounter, foreshadowing the transformation that was to come. In that instant of infinite light, I felt that something extraordinary was about to happen. It was then that he appeared, emerging from the light with a presence that transcended any image I could imagine. Jesus was there, not as a distant figure or statue, but as someone who emanated warmth, compassion, and authority. His words, spoken in a serene and at the same time penetrating voice, seemed to pierce every layer of my soul. "Draven." He spoke with a calm that contrasted with the intensity of the environment. "Come, allow me to show you the truth within you." His tone was welcoming, but at the same time demanding, as if he wanted to tear away from me all the masks I had built. As his words echoed, my life unfolded like an uncut movie. I remembered the moments when, in the midst of worship and obligations, I just repeated gestures without really feeling the divine presence. My entire trajectory was exposed. Every act of kindness, every time I failed to act out of pride, or merely fulfilling a ritual. In the midst of this revelation, tears mingled with the light and a feeling of vulnerability came over me. Jesus, with his eyes full of love, did not judge, but rather showed me the naked truth, that my faith had become empty, a simple, heartless transaction. The conversation between us transcended time. I heard his voice that, at the same time, comforted me and confronted me. In a dialogue that seemed to echo in eternity, he asked me, "Draven, why did you get attached to rituals without your heart being there?" The question resonated as a challenge, a call for me to face all my insecurities and omissions. As I tried to formulate a response, the clarity of the revelation flooded my mind, opening space for an understanding I had never achieved. In that meeting, every word spoken by Jesus was an invitation to be reborn, to transform my way of living and loving. At that moment, a wave of clarity invaded my being, sweeping away all the doubt that tormented me. Waking up in my hospital bed surrounded by stunned silence, I realized I was no longer stuck in my old routine. While doctors whispered about a miracle, a new inner voice whispered that true rebirth was internal and not physical. Beside the bed, Jonathan entered, his eyes full of concern and hope. "Draven, you look different," he commented, observing the serenity that now emanated from me. I knew that somehow I had awakened to a reality where faith manifested itself, in a pure and genuine way. The first words I spoke were like a hymn of liberation. "I saw the truth, Jonathan. It was not just the light that surrounded me, but the revelation of who I really am, far from empty rituals." With each sentence, the memories of that supernatural encounter mixed with the feeling of peace that I had never experienced. The transformation was palpable, an internal reconfiguration that invited me to see life with new eyes. As we talked, Sarah, who visited daily, joined us with a shy but understanding smile. "Draven, it seems like you found something that many seek without ever realizing," she said, with the sweetness of someone who understands the depths of the soul. Her presence, along with Jonathan's, reinforced the idea that this spiritual awakening was the beginning of a journey of self-knowledge and true devotion. The hours passed as if time had acquired its own rhythm, slow and meditative, where each word and each silence carried a sacred meaning. Amid this environment of renewal, I heard the inner voice of Jesus, now clearer, telling me to leave behind the shackles of a transactional faith and embrace the true essence of divine love. I felt that my scars were not just physical marks but signs of a battle won, a testimony that spiritual transformation was possible even after the worst moments. Upon resuming my life outside the hospital, I felt an uncontrollable impulse to share my experience, to transform my own journey into a legacy for those who sought the true essence of faith. At each encounter, whether at a small church gathering or a large community event, I emotionally and sincerely told the story of that accident that changed everything. "I saw the light that transcends mere ritual," I said, my eyes shining with emotion. "And I discovered that faith is not measured by tithes but by the love we put into the world." These words echoed among the people who listened to me, sparking questions and encouraging a new perspective on devotion. Jonathan, who was always by my side, started organizing discussion groups where we shared our own doubts and transformations. "Draven, your story has inspired so many people to rethink their priorities," he commented at one of the meetings, while closely observing the attentive faces of the participants. This partnership turned into a true mission, where my every word served as encouragement and an invitation to an introspection that many had avoided for a long time. Sarah, with her tenderness and insight, took on the role of messenger of compassion. In one of the meetings, she stated, "When Draven speaks, we feel that we are no longer alone in this search for true faith. He shows us that even in the darkest moments, there is an opportunity for rebirth." These declarations spread like seeds of hope, germinating in hearts that previously clung to empty rituals and meaningless obligations. As the stories intertwined and the testimonies accumulated, Marcus, the eternal skeptic, began to notice changes not just in me, but in the entire community. In a private conversation, he admitted, "Maybe I disbelieved too much, but there is something real in this transformation. Maybe faith should be lived with the heart and not just practiced as a ritual." These words, even coming from one of the most outspoken critics, symbolize the profound impact that experience had on all of us. My journey was no longer just about my own redemption, but a call for everyone to find authenticity in their devotion. The legacy I left was one of transformation, of a faith that transcends the obvious and that, when lived genuinely, illuminates the lives of those who are willing to listen and change. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.